Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, now that Baker Mayfield is with the Carolina Panthers, we're going to take a look at some non-NFC East threats to the Eagles in the NFC playoff race this year. Plus, the Eagles turned 89 today. A love letter to the old ball and chain coming up on this edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Friday edition of the show. I'm Louie DiBiase. He's Gino Camilleri. We've been your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast now for 4 years, running strong on all podcast platforms. Also now in video form on YouTube. We're always talking birds all throughout the day on Twitter. Hit us up at Locked On Birds, at GC24_football, and at DiBiase LOE. Gino, this is our last show until we really dive into all-out training camp preview. Next week, Tuesday, we are 2 weeks away from the start of Eagles training camp at the NovaCare Complex. We're back to daily Monday through Friday. We're here, man. We made it through the dead zone, and it's time to start going through our positional previews, talking about roster battles, talking about the starters, the guys in the bubble, all that and more. We're going to dive in real soon.
Didn't really feel too much like a dead zone with this
Not
Eagles
really,
team.
right? Because the Bradbury and Tart signings were so late, too. I feel like we didn't really have to get through much.
Not at all. And then once training camp comes, once the roster cuts start to begin, then the fun begins all over again because there's a new set of players that will be at the disposal of the player personnel staff to look through. And the Eagles have done that in the past. I remember Chip Kelly's first year, I think they brought 3 guys in after that first cut down to 53. They're not afraid to go outside of the building and bring in a bunch of that. Do you remember who was probably the most prominent of those players?
I have a sickness because I know the quarterback they brought in, or at least I'm thinking 2015 when they cut Tim Tebow. After that first wave of cuts, they brought in Stephen Morris, who was a quarterback for Miami and with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And we're all like, they're about to keep Tim Tebow after that great game he had against the Jets. And Chip Kelly said no and brought in Morris. I don't know why I know him, but that was Jeff Mayle the receiver? Or I don't know. I'm at a loss.
He caught a big bomb off of the practice squad a few years after Chip Kelly left. Bryce Treggs,
that's right, against the Giants 2016.
Yes, sir. He was brought in after that first day of cuts. So we're going to get into this thing fast and furiously in the next week. And we did, I think, just 1 week of 3 episodes, and we've done 4 the last couple. And we're going to get back to daily. And like you said, you could find us anywhere. And we have a full 90-man roster battle to look at. We haven't even began to touch the surface of that here in this quote-unquote dead zone.
That's right.
But 2 weeks from tomorrow, Lou, training camp, and just a month and a half away from regular season football. We're going to get preseason games here within a month or so. It's not too far off, my friend. Not too far at all.
No, it's not. And yesterday on the show, we talked about some non-starters, some backups and role players that we're going to be especially invested in. You can find that podcast on all platforms. And Gino, the Eagles have a lot of expectations this year heading into training camp. It's, similar vibe to just a lot of years where they came in with lofty goals, right? I feel like it's always that year 2. 2011, the Dream Team, of course, 2015, just when things really shake up in the offseason, 2017, 2019, 2022 as well, it's in there. And I don't think it's going to have the same disappointment as some of those other years, for sure. And, I think with the moves they made, and we talked about how in May and June, they were still adding to this roster. Impact players they needed in the secondary. Jaquiski Tart at safety, James Bradbury at corner. Like, this team looks ready to not only compete for the playoffs like they did again last year and make the wild card, but a lot of people are picking the Eagles as the NFC East favorite, even over the reigning champions, the Dallas Cowboys. And the Cowboys still look great on paper. Washington, I think, is vastly improved this year. I still think they have a ton of star power that should be taken seriously. And But, I want to remove, the division race from this because Baker Mayfield signed with the Panthers the other day, and I started to think about, the Panthers roster is pretty good. Could they be the 2020 Cleveland Browns that Baker took to the playoffs and even won a playoff game? Sure. So I agree that the Eagles should be in it to the very end, maybe even the favorite to win the division this year. But for the sake of this hypothetical, to take a look at some non-NFC East threats to the Birds, let's say the Cowboys or the Commanders, they do win the division. Who are the teams battling? And again, I know I think the Eagles are going to win the division, but for the sake of this hypothetical, to preview the NFC, what are the other teams you would think, like last year, that are maybe the biggest threats to grabbing one of those playoff spots? Like teams that are not the division favorite, right? So I would say not Tampa Bay, not Green Bay, not LA, some second tier teams that you're looking at.
Okay, so that's how I was going to look at it. I think each division has their top team.
Yes.
And I think it's very clear who it is in the West, with LA coming off of the previous Super Bowl. Tampa, Tom Brady back for yet another run. We'll see what happens with that roster, which looks roaring and ready to go. Green Bay, I don't see anybody challenging them even without Devontae Adams. They have Zadarius Smith, who was left there on defense. Not as strong as I would say their 2021 roster was, but I still believe that they will contend for the North in 2022. So looking at all of these divisions, I would say go weakest to strongest here. I got to say, in the NFC North, Minnesota doesn't scare me yet again with Kirk Cousins. I know they've made improvements. I don't know if they compete for that spot because they do have to play Green Bay twice, and can they overcome Chicago, who should be better this year, Detroit, who should be better this year, two teams that are still very young and looking better year over year, I would say. Then you look, I would say, at the South, because Atlanta doesn't have Matt Ryan anymore. They have Marcus Mariota. They're in a complete rebuild.
Yeah, they're not a real
basically threat. Count them out of the equation for this season. I would then go to Carolina, I would say. And does Baker have it in his arm without two premier running backs to take a team to the playoffs? That's a good Carolina team with a Matt Rule.
Does have better receivers, though, right? With DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, and Christian McCaffrey is the best receiving back maybe in football.
And Matt Rule is on his last hurrah. So if they're going to lay it all out on the line, that would be a team that, if that seventh wild card spot does come into play, they absolutely should compete for that as well. And the Saints, who I think should also compete for another wild card spot with how complete their roster is, it all comes down to the quarterback question, right? And that
which is a question for most of these teams, Gino.
Right. That leads me to the West with Seattle. Who knows what they're going to do in Seattle right now? The Niners, who knows what is going on in San Francisco? Although they're going to be a team that competes, we know that. It still comes down to the quarterback question. That leaves Arizona. And I say Arizona, most likely San Francisco, the Saints, and Carolina. If I had to pick four teams to compete for those three wildcard spots outside of the NFC East.
Outside of the East,
that would be the biggest threat, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these teams have a similar theme, and to the Eagles too, but I think the Eagles are the best of this group, and I think they have the best chance to win their division. Definitely. Not only because I think those other divisions have just better favorites. Like the Eagles don't have to compete with Tampa, Green Bay, or LA, but also the Eagles, I think, have the best team of those other squads we're talking about, Arizona, San Francisco.
And strength of schedule. Don't forget
strength of schedule too. Yeah, absolutely. I think Arizona, to me, like if I had to choose a top three of that second tier, the Cardinals have the best quarterback. So I think the Cardinals are definitely number one. And then I would say to, push those other two spots in the NFC for the playoffs outside of a division spot, San Francisco, like it's of the quarterbacks that are unknowns, right? Baker Mayfield, Trey Lance, Kirk Cousins, I guess you know what he is now, right? Jameis Winston, though, even Carson Wentz, if you want to throw a team in the East like Washington in there. I like Trey Lance in San Francisco, actually, the second most outside of Arizona. And then, I don't know, Gino, I just like the rosters of New Orleans, Minnesota, and Carolina are great, but I think of all these quarterbacks we've discussed, Kirk, I think Jameis Winston and Baker might hold their team back the most. So I would say those three teams are certainly behind Arizona, San Fran, even Washington and Philly.
You would have to believe that those teams are going to rely heavily on defense to win games and heavily on their run game to win as well. For how much Carolina's paying a guy like Christian McCaffrey, you would have to believe that that's the case. Same thing in New Orleans with Alvin Kamara. And you look at a team like Minnesota, which has Dalvin Cook and Alex Madison, as well as Kenny Nwangu, who might be the best third back in football right now. Then you look at the other two teams you mentioned, Lou. even with the question marks in San Francisco at quarterback, their defense is elite by far. Their playmakers on offense are elite. Even if you get good quarterback play, that's going to be enough to go.
I think they can get 2021.
6.
I think they can get 2021 Jalen Hurts out of Trey Lance, where he runs for over 600 rushing yards and he makes big plays with his arm. And he's not going to be a complete product as a overall accurate passer going through his reads, but he's got a huge arm, right? So he's going to be able to push the ball down the field to Ayuk and Deebo Samuel and George Kittle. So yeah, I just think the Niners, I think Arizona is the safest and they have the highest floor and ceiling of all of those teams. And then I think the 49ers, I don't know what's going on with all these Trey Lance rumors, but I think it's being super overblown. Like everyone's just assuming he's going to be a massive bust and they should keep Garoppolo. I don't really see it that way. I think San Fran would be the second team that's the biggest threat outside of the East when it comes to non-division winners. But it's super fascinating. A lot of these teams are in very similar situations, and it's kind of unfortunate for a lot of these teams. I think the Eagles, Cardinals, and Niners have a lot of hope still at quarterback, but man, Gino, I'd hate to be, and I said it on the show the other day, I'd hate to be Carolina, Minnesota, even New Orleans. It just feels like they're almost at a dead end at the quarterback position, and those teams don't have the future assets to go get a guy like, Philly does and some of these other teams.
Out of those teams that we mentioned outside of the top 4 in the NFC East, would Jalen Hurts be the second best quarterback in that group behind Kyler Murray?
Right now, yes. I think Trey Lance has more upside, but right now, yeah, Jalen Hurts would be – I like him better than Winston. I like him better than Baker. Certainly like him better than Kirk Cousins. I know Cousins consistently throws 4,000 yards and nearly 30 touchdowns, but when it comes to weightless stats, Kirk Cousins is never at the most important moments. Derek Carr was always like that too, but Carr last year went on a run with fourth quarter comebacks and led his team to the playoffs with all these holes that you've never seen that with Kirk Cousins, and I don't think you ever will.
And to look at the NFC as a whole, even with the addition of Baker, I still say Jalen Hurts is a top 6 quarterback in this conference all day long. And that's going to allow you to compete as well as with a top offensive line, a top defensive line, an improved secondary, an improved receiver room, and even better running back room that should be healthier year over year. Looking at the landscape of the East, which we haven't touched on, I believe all of those teams, if they didn't get better, they stayed marginally the same, or I would say decreased at a lot of positions, much like Dallas, where you lose Lyle Collins, and then on the other side of the ball, you lose Randy Gregory. Those are two huge – I cannot overstate how big of losses those are for a team that really relied on them. Randy Gregory was the second best pass rusher on that team, and Lyle Collins was a consistently good piece. The Giants probably are going to be better with Brian Dable. I would say Washington with their defense, how good it is. Even if you get average play out of Carson Wentz, the receivers should be able to do enough. If you get the majority of 2021 Wentz, I think they'll be better. Gino, I know Washington has a lower floor than Dallas this year. I actually, ceiling-wise, would be more concerned with Washington than Dallas. I think most people wouldn't agree with that, but I'm still terrified of Washington's defense, man. I don't want to see our offensive line, as good as it is, have to go against a rotation that deep. And you're going to be banged up after these 6 games where you're taking on Tank Lawrence and you're taking on Kevon Thibodeau and all of these pass
rushers. I know Dak Prescott's always –
Washington is scared.
I know Dak Prescott's always consistently in that first tier at the bottom of it, though. But how many times has Dak Prescott went nuclear? You know what I mean? Where he's just went totally off. He really hasn't much. Carson Wentz could throw for 6 interceptions in a game, but I'm more scared of Carson throwing for 406 TDs on you than Dak Prescott. So it'll be super interesting. This conference is absolutely wide open. Philly is right in the mix of that, and they should be a division favorite. But I just wanted to, for the sake of looking at some of these other NFC teams, if you didn't win the division, who you're really going up against. Because it's a lot of good rosters, but a lot of them right now have good to okay play at the quarterback position. Today's edition of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Dave. Level with me here for a second. We've all been in a situation at some point in our lives when we're a little tight on cash. Maybe you could only afford to put a few gallons of gas in your tank, or you got another save the date and you're wondering how you're going to afford a gift. I've got a ton of weddings coming up. I remember just a year and a half ago, I quit the overnights at the radio station to really just dive all in on podcasting. And At first it wasn't really a steady paycheck and you had to grind. This is where Dave can help. If you're living paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet, it can be really stressful when unexpected expenses come up, especially. Now Dave can help you get out of a pinch when you really need it. Hindsight is 20/20 and you can't change the past, but what if you could get a little help from your future self? Maybe you'd ask to borrow a little cash. Now you can with Dave. Dave is a banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, which we know how expensive gas prices are right now. Buy a wedding gift. I got 2 weddings in a couple months. Gotta get one as well for that. Or just simply catch up on bills. Rent, super expensive right now as well across the United States. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. There's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief that they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and need some extra help, download the Dave app today and think of it as helping hands from you, future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's Dave, D-A-V-E. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. Gino, getting into next right here on Locked On Eagles, I wanted to keep talking about the offensive side of the football. And of course, Jalen Hurts is going to be a massive part of what the Eagles do in 2022. But the Eagles made sure they surrounded him with talent, right? So where even if you get 2021 Jalen Hurts or just a little bit better than that version of your starting quarterback, they're going to be better this year because they've got A.J. Brown, they've got Devontae Smith, they've got Dallas Goedert, they have Quez Watkins and Miles Sanders, the best offensive line in football. This team is loaded on paper on the offensive side of the football. And I just started thinking about receiver more, and I had some time today, so I did a little research. And we've talked a lot on this show about how much the Eagles invest in wide receiver, sometimes how much they've missed on it, how they're killing it right now at the position, and how much they really do prioritize this spot. But I actually wanted to put a number to it. I was curious, because I started to think even too, like back in the day with McNabb, they never really surrounded with McNabb with talent, but did they try? And so I went back all the way from 2000 up until 2022 to see how many first and second round picks the Eagles either drafted at the receiver position or traded one of those picks to get a receiver. And they actually, and I thought this might be the case, but I confirmed it through this research, the Eagles have spent the most first and second round picks on wide receiver since 2000, 11 as a matter of fact. Listen to this list. Todd Pinkston, second round pick. Freddie Mitchell was a first rounder. Reggie Brown was a second rounder. Deshaun Jackson was also a day 2 pick. Jeremy Maclin was a first rounder. Jordan Matthews, second. Aguilar, first. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, second. Jalen Reagor, first. And then first round picks for Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. Wow. It's crazy. The second most was actually the New York Giants with 9. And it just goes to show you, this team has missed a lot at receiver with high picks, but I love that they're willing to correct those mistakes and they prioritize the spot so much because, even when you do fail, even with Wentz, they failed so much at receiver, but at least they tried. And that's a big thing that some other teams don't always do. Like, even though we criticize what McNabb had, they did spend a second rounder on Pinkston, a first rounder on Freddie Mitchell, a second rounder on Reggie Brown. They did try at times. They just failed miserably. So, but I'll take the attempt always.
You would have to look at the time when Jeffrey Lurie took over the team. And since then,
because before that, they didn't do it at all.
Makes a ton of sense, right? You look at an owner whose philosophy since he came in was to throw the football. Who's the first quarterback he gets? It's Donovan, who, as good as he was as a runner, a majority of his game was through the air. It was being a mobile quarterback who could hit his targets downfield when they came open, and they tried to. Freddie Mitchell was just a bad football player. Reggie Brown, I would say, was overrated for where he was drafted, and Todd Pinkston was a reliable threat, but he never got to that very good to elite ceiling, right, which you would want for a top caliber quarterback. And then going down the list, they tried to do it again with a guy like Deshaun Jackson, who hit, Jeremy Maclin, who hit. Mm-hmm. Then you take a couple year hiatus. You okay on Aguilar, I'd give it an even. Yeah. JJ was a miss. Jalen Reagor was a miss. And then you corrected it again. So it's always, if there's a bad side to it, they're going to correct it. They're not going to be a team that they stand up at the plate and they strike out the first 2 times and then they get scared and they take a strikeout looking because they don't want to swing the bat, right?
Yeah, Gino, a lot of teams would have been, after J.J. Arcega-Whiteside and Jalen Reagor, they would have stopped there saying, all right, that's enough. We got to start prioritizing other positions with these picks.
Right.
We can't just keep overcorrecting. But then you wouldn't have Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. I want this team to not, before, you've said it before, not look at what you've done. And no matter what, that's a sunk cost. You can't fix that with that player. So you still have to replace them at this kind of position. And they've nailed it right now. I mean, talk about like the Detroit Lions, Gino, they went 3 years in a row where they took a receiver in the first round, and they didn't get it right until Calvin Johnson, like 5 years later. The Eagles self-corrected quickly and they bounced back. Most teams don't.
And you have to look at the precedent that was set around the league the last couple of years. Even if you can't land one of those top quality guys in the draft, if you pass on Justin Jefferson, let's say, for example, metaphorically speaking, they pass on Justin Jefferson. They weren't a team that went and traded picks for wide receivers until they saw the result of what had happened the last couple of years. DeAndre Hopkins traded for multiple picks. Stephon Diggs traded for multiple picks. Well, then they said, por qué a los dos? Why don't we do both here? Why don't we invest a high round pick and use our high round picks to go out and trade for established veteran players that would be potentially the first 1,000-yard duo that this team has had in God knows how long.
That's what I love too, Gino. They didn't just want it to make it the receiver not a weakness. It wasn't just that it wasn't a weakness anymore in 2021, which was the case with Devontae Smith and Quez Watkins, but they wanted it to be a strength again, a huge,
an elite
strength, right? An elite top tier unit at a position that you need it, especially when you have a young quarterback you're trying to get an answer to. Love the approach, love the mindset, but so fascinating to see how much they've invested at receiver since 2000 with top 2-round picks. I'd say of those players, Gino, I don't know, you're right, because I guess it depends on what you determine a success or a bust with a draft pick. So I'd say they were 5 out of 11 when you consider hits. I would put Aguilar in there just because a guy that has 9 catches in the Super Bowl is your best deep threat in your championship year and was your best deep threat the year later in a deep playoff run. I'd throw him in there. But, with Deshaun Jackson, Jeremy Maclin, I'd say Nelly, Devontae Smith, and A.J. Brown are going to be hits. 5 out of 11. I mean, they haven't been great with it, but again, I love that they keep taking.
I'd say Todd. I would definitely throw Todd Pinkston in there for how long he was with the team.
I guess you give like a half a point to some of these guys, right? Because Jordan Matthews, I think the numbers were a little skewed. I think they were a little overambitious, and they kind of lied about how good he was.
You have to go tier 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, I mean, back-to-back years, right? He had over 800, I think, his rookie year in 2014, and he sniffed 1,000 in back-to-back years with 900 the following 2 seasons. So, even J-Matt was okay for 3 years. He was pretty solid when you didn't have much else.
And we didn't see him with a true number 1 outside of the single season that he had played with Jeremy.
He got traded before that opportunity came, yeah.
And we never saw it again. But this time, not only do you have a number 1A, you have a number 1B that will now open up the floor for 2, 3, 4, 5. And there was a stat that came out the other day. The most efficient players out of the slot last season. Do you know who number 2 on that list was, Lou?
It's A.J. Brown?
Quez Watkins, my friend. So now
I'll take it.
you have one of the most efficient slot receivers in football that can absolutely blaze out of that middle area, has fantastic short area quickness, while on the outside you have to worry about these 2 guys. If I was a betting man, I would want to be on the right side of history with this. And I am a betting man. I don't know why I said if I was. I would have to see what the odds were that the Eagles would have 2 1,000-yard receivers. Because talent-wise, Lou, you talk about 2 of the hits. 2 of the hits, that's what, 15% of the overall group that we just talked about there? Maybe It's probably closer to 22% is in this single year, within a year of each other, within Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. Like, you got those guys within a calendar season, and 3 of those picks were spent on those guys. And now it's just not, let's take one swing, see if it works, wait a couple of years. Let's take another. No, we're going to take multiple swings, and we're hoping that these swings are either 3-run homers or a damn grand slam, because that's what they're trying to do here right now. There's going to be no ifs, ands, or buts about the players around them. If they underperform, you're going to know what the problem is. And that's just not at quarterback too. If the third receiver doesn't step up, somebody else is going to have to come in and play with them, because the idea is those two guys are going to make everybody else better around them.
100%. Yeah, and maybe you give half a point to Pinkston and Jordan Matthews, so maybe that rounds out to 6 out of 11. But yeah, just I thought it was fascinating to do that research and see how much they've invested in it and when they've hit and when they haven't. And right now, they've definitely corrected it to the point where receiver is going to be a massive strength moving forward, I think, for a long time. With A.J. Brown now having that contract extension, with Devontae Smith only getting better in year 2. I think he's being slept on right now nationally across the NFL because of A.J. Brown. And as you said, Quez Watkins, one of the most efficient receivers coming out of the slot in just year 2 as a 6th-round draft pick. The sky's the limit for this unit. Gino, coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles, we're going to sign off by wishing our squad a happy birthday. The Eagles turned 89 today. We'll get into that coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. We'd like to interrupt this edition of Locked On Eagles to give a shout out to one of our sponsors. It's the official Locked On Podcast Network. It's BetOnline at betonline.net. They're your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest developments, league reviews, and news, including the MLB right now. The Philadelphia Phillies closed out another series win against the Washington Nationals last night. We'd like to interrupt this edition of Locked On Eagles with a shout out to another one of our sponsors. It's the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's BetOnline. At betonline.net, they're your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest developments, league reviews, and news, including the MLB right now. The Philadelphia Phillies close out another series win last night, 5-3 against the Washington Nationals. The Phillies hold right now. They're in sole possession of the 3rd wildcard spot in the NL. It's a great time to be a baseball fan in Philadelphia. Bet on the Phillies to hammer that over, to cover all of it at betonline.net. They remain your best spot for all your scores, podcasts, and news this season. Plus, you can bet on the MMA, boxing, golf, NBA futures. Where's Kevin Durant going to end up? Where's Kyrie Irving going? Is he teaming back up with LeBron James and the Lakers? Head over to the website today, betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action, because BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Friday edition of LOE. We start off training camp previews next week. We're back to daily shows Monday through Friday, so make sure you subscribe to Locked On Eagles wherever you get the podcast, and we're also available in video form on YouTube. So excited to start previewing this 2022 season. It's the most hyped I've been for a year since, I don't know, I'd probably say since 2019. I mean, it's been 3 years, and so excited to see this team just get back on the football field. And we have a lot of substance to discuss. And, Gino, it's cool. The Eagles turned 89 today. 89 years ago in 1933, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets were purchased by the Bell family. And man, have our lives been so much different because of it. Who would have thought in 1933 they would have affected the lives of 2 Italians from Western New York that were born in the 90s? And yeah, God, those jerseys, man, you're showing on the screen. The blue and yellow, which they wore in 2007, were abysmal. But, you know, man, thank God for this football team. That's all I'll say. And it brought us this show. It brought, you know, there's such a, you know, they're frustrating, they're toxic at times, but they're also beautiful, entertaining, and magical. And, you know, again, I wouldn't have the friends I do today, including you, because of the show, or the career, or really just the passion for this sport without the Birds. So happy birthday to the Philadelphia Eagles. And let's get another Super Bowl. Hopefully it doesn't take 80, it was math time, 84 years. Let's say,
yeah, 84
the
years.
next 5 years, let's get another one. Let's start the next century off with a couple more titles.
For those listening at home, I have in the back of my studio,
Lots
which
of
I'm holding up in
beautiful-
front of the screen, a beautiful placard that my parents got me when I was younger, showing all the jerseys throughout Eagles history. And we talk about how beautiful the Eagles are. Those first jerseys in 1934 were throw-up yellow and absolutely disgusting. Get those all the way out of here. Take us to where we are today. Take us to next year when they're going to be wearing Kelly green. They
That's
are
right.
not just a team that entertains us on paper. They also have some of the most beautiful uniforms throughout the history of the entire league. One of the most storied franchises in the entire NFL. The only team ever to beat Vince Lombardi in an NFL championship.
And they beat the greatest quarterback of all time in a title when he threw for 500 yards, man.
Where can you say that? There's some greats throughout the Eagles timeline. You can go down the list. You got Iron Chuck Bednarik. You can go to the greats of Reggie White.
They have some of the most
Jaworski,
entertaining players of all time, Gino.
Randy
Like
Cunningham.
when it comes to pure highlight reel, they have two of the most exciting quarterbacks ever, Randall Cunningham and Michael Vick. When it comes to mobility, even look up just Donovan McNabb 2004 highlights or Carson Wentz 2017. Deshaun Jackson's the greatest deep threat ever. LaShawn McCoy might be the biggest ankle breaker of all time. That's the other thing. It's not just that this team brought us a career and a passion and a fan base that is intoxicating to be with, for good and for bad, for sure. But like the entertaining product of football they have too. I mean, there's a lot of Eagles fans that are our age because of the excitement, especially on the offensive side of the football that they brought.
There's a lot of prospects coming up in the NFL draft and recently in this past year that talked about how much they fell in love with those early 2010s Philadelphia Eagles teams. Garrett Wilson was the one who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what generation you grew up as an Eagles fan. You could go back to the days of Tommy McDonald, one of the all-time greats. You look at some of the guys, Herm Edwards, who make the Miracle at the Meadowlands play. You can go on down the list, and everybody has probably their favorite player and then somebody who's under the radar that really has a place in their heart. And you also tie all of these memories together through the single voice of the Philadelphia Eagles, who I think everybody in Philadelphia has respect for, and anybody who's ever listened to a radio call of this team. Merrill Reese is what I think everybody could aspire to be, not just as an entertainer in this business, but just as a human being. And the guy next to him and Mike Quick, and how they bring in all of these guys like Harold Carmichael to be ambassadors for the team, and how they just take care of anybody who's ever worn the colors. You see these get-togethers and where they played golf last week and they had the cast from Always Sunny was there and Brian Dawkins shows up, and then you look around and you see some of these just obscure names, but it's just one of those things that not every team in the NFL has players buy in so much to the environment that they played in and have true love for the city. You see people keep coming back. Connor Barwin, he moves out to LA. Oh, yeah. What is the first thing he does? He moves back to Philadelphia, has a house in the city.
Dude, when the Eagles are good, it's the greatest place to be in the entire NFL, and it's not even close. And can it get bad when it's bad? Absolutely. 2015, 2020, but it's because of the passion that this entire city has for this football team. And thank God 7-year-old me randomly decided to get into football and pick this football team, because I don't know, I wouldn't be doing a podcast like this without it. So I've always told everybody I've ever dated, they were here before you and they're going to be here after you, man. OG day one.
Always. The fiance, she got right on board.
She knows, man. You got to accept it.
And that's another thing too. My fiance never had a team, and the first game of football that she really was taught was through me sitting there and telling her. And what was it? It was watching the Philadelphia Eagles. And I'm sure people have memories of that with their grandfathers and their dads. And none of my family likes the Eagles. So that's my memory, is having that with her and having it with you and celebrating the Super Bowl. And my couple of friends shouted them out from high school and college that rooted for the team. No matter where we are, we always know deep down we'll shoot each other a text when they're doing good. And it's just when you get to go Birds out in public, it's one of the most beautiful things.
Especially when you're not in Philly and you get one. Like I was in Arizona the one time and I got one. It was so thrilling. Gotta love it.
One in Dallas.
That's the best, man.
Got that a couple times.
You love this football team. I was in the Dallas airport the one time. I saw a Cowboys NFC East champion shirt. I just wanted to put it on the ground and just rub my shoe all over it, man. That's a Philadelphia Eagles way. Yeah, it's a dump. That's why we love the Birds, because we hate the Dallas Cowboys so much. All right, Gino, that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Eagles. Happy birthday to the Birds. They turned 89. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Always the last 4 years. So grateful to have a prominent voice on a team this historic. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, because we're getting back to daily podcasts Monday through Friday on your beloved Philadelphia Eagles as we get you ready for training camp, which starts now 2 weeks from Tuesday, July 26th at the NovaCare Complex. We're free and available everywhere, as well as on YouTube in video form and on Twitter at Locked On Birds, at DiBiase LOE, and at GC24_football. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen, it's the Locked On NFL podcast, all the news across the league in under 30 minutes. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening. And let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.